The Chronicle of Peru by Pedro Cieza de León, a Spanish conquistador and chronicler who lived from 1520 to 1554. Translated to English by Clements R. Markha for the Hakluyt Society of London, England. Narration by AWS Polly. All content is in the public domain. Chapter 51. In which the account of the Indians of Puerto Viejo is finished, and concerning the founding of that city, and who was its founder. I shall be brief in describing what more there is concerning these provinces of Puerto Viejo, because the substance of my account of them has already been written in the preceding chapter, and I shall then return to the palaces of Tumabamba, where I left the main thread of my history. I may here observe that, as soon as the Adelantado Don Pedro de Alvarado and the Marshal Don Diego de Almagro had made their agreement on the plains of Riobamba, the Adelantado Don Pedro went to the city of the kings, where he was to receive the 100,000 castellanos which were to be paid for his fleet and armament. Meanwhile the Marshal Don Diego de Almagro left the Captain Sebastian de Belalcázar with certain orders respecting the conquest of the province of Quito, and set out to establish the settlements on the coast. He then put things in order at San Miguel and Chimo, and looked out for a good and convenient site for the city of Truxillo, which was afterwards founded by the Marquis Don Francisco Pizarro. In all these affairs, as I have been told, the Marshal Don Diego de Almagro showed himself to be a diligent captain. When he arrived at the city of San Miguel, it was made known to him that, when the ships which came from Tierra Firme, and from the provinces of Nicaragua, Guatemala, and New Spain, arrived on the coast of Peru, the crews landed and did much harm to the natives of Manta, and of the coast of the province of Puerto Viejo. To avoid these evils, and that the natives might be watched and protected, he determined to send a captain to select a site where a town or city might be founded. He selected the Captain Francisco Pacheco for this duty, and ordered him to set out with the requisite number of followers. Francisco Pacheco, in obedience to his orders, started from a village called Picasa, and founded the city of Puerto Viejo in the locality which appeared to him most suitable. This was on the day of St. Gregory, the 12th of March, in the year of the birth of our Redeemer the Lord Jesus Christ 1535, and he founded it in the name of the Emperor Don Carlos our King and Lord. While the Captain Francisco Pacheco was employed on this service, Pedro de Puelles, with some Spanish troops, came from Quito, where the Captain Sebastian de Belalcázar was Lieutenant General for Don Francisco Pizarro, to conquer the same coast of the South Sea, and there were some misunderstandings between them. When the news reached the Governor Don Francisco Pizarro, he gave such orders as appeared to him best for the service of His Majesty and the good government and protection of the Indians, in obedience to which, after the Captain Francisco Pacheco had conquered these provinces, and marched through them for nearly 2 years, he peopled this city, the Captain Pedro de Puelles having returned to Quito. At first the city was called the new town of Puerto Viejo, and it is situated in the most convenient and best part of the province, not very far from the South Sea. In many districts belonging to this city of Puerto Viejo, they make deep holes for the burial of their dead, which look more like wells than tombs. When they wish to inter a body, they clear out all the loose earth. A large number of Indians then assemble, dancing, singing, and mourning, not forgetting to drink, and beating drums. After they have done all these things, according to the custom of their ancestors, they lower the body down into the deep tomb, and, if he is a chief or important person, they bury the most beautiful and beloved of his women with him, besides jewels, food, and jars of wine made from maize. They then place those thick canes which grow in the country over the whole. As these canes are hollow, they take care to fill them with that drink made of maize or of roots, which they call aca, because, being deceived by the devil, they believe, at least so they have told me, that the dead man drinks of the liquor they put into the canes. This custom of burying arms, treasure, and food with the dead, is practiced in the greater part of these newly discovered countries, and in many provinces they also bury women and boys alive with them. Chapter 52. Of the wells which there are at the point of Santa Elena, of the story they tell respecting the arrival of giants in those parts, and of the tar which is found there. As, at the beginning of this work, I gave a detailed account of all the ports on the coast of Peru, from Panama to the confines of Chile, which is a great length of coast, it does not appear necessary to repeat them here, and for this reason I shall not treat of them. I have also described the principal places in this province. There are, however, reports concerning giants in Peru, who landed on the coast at the point of Santa Elena, within the jurisdiction of this city of Puerto Viejo, which require notice. I will relate what I have been told, without paying attention to the various versions of the story current among the vulgar, who always exaggerate everything. The natives relate the following tradition, which had been received from their ancestors from very remote times. There arrived on the coast, in boats made of reeds, as big as large ships, a party of men of such size that, from the knee downwards, their height was as great as the entire height of an ordinary man, though he might be of good stature. Their limbs were all in proportion to the deformed size of their bodies, and it was a monstrous thing to see their heads, with hair reaching to the shoulders. Their eyes were as large as small plates. They had no beards, and were dressed in the skins of animals, others only in the dress which nature gave them, and they had no women with them. When they arrived at this point, they made a sort of village, and even now the sites of their houses are pointed out. But as they found no water, in order to remedy the want, they made some very deep wells, works which are truly worthy of remembrance, for such are their magnitude, that they certainly must have been executed by very strong men. They dug these wells in the living rock until they met with water, and then they lined them with masonry from top to bottom in such sort that they will endure for many ages. The water in these wells is very good and wholesome, and always so cold that it is very pleasant to drink it. Having built their village, and made their wells or cisterns where they could drink, these great men, or giants, consumed all the provisions they could lay their hands upon in the surrounding country, insomuch that one of them ate more meat than 50 of the natives of the country could. As all the food they could find was not sufficient to sustain them, they killed many fish in the sea with nets and other gear. They were detested by the natives, because in using their women they killed them, and the men also in another way. But the Indians were not sufficiently numerous to destroy this new people who had come to occupy their lands. They made great leagues against them, but met with no success. All the natives declare that God our Lord brought upon them a punishment in proportion to the enormity of their offense. While they were all together, engaged in their accursed, a fearful and terrible fire came down from heaven with a great noise, out of the midst of which there issued a shining angel with a glittering sword, with which, at one blow, they were all killed, and the fire consumed them. There only remained a few bones and skulls, which God allowed to remain without being consumed by the fire, as a memorial of this punishment. This is what they say concerning these giants, and we believe the account because in this neighborhood they have found, and still find, enormous bones. I have heard from Spaniards who have seen part of a double tooth, that they judged the whole tooth would have weighed more than half a butcher's pound. They also had seen another piece of a shin bone, and it was marvelous to relate how large it was. These men are witnesses to the story, and the site of the village may be seen, as well as the wells and cisterns made by the giants. I am unable to say from what direction they came, because I do not know. In this year 1550, I, being in the city of the kings, heard that, when the most illustrious Don Antonio de Mendoza was viceroy and governor of New Spain, they found certain bones of men who must have been even larger than these giants. I have also heard that previously they discovered, in a most ancient tomb in the city of Mexico, or in some other part of that kingdom, certain bones of giants. From all this we may gather that, as so many persons saw and affirmed these things, these giants really did exist. At the point of Santa Elena, which, as I have before said, is on the coast of Peru within the jurisdiction of the city of Puerto Viejo, there is a thing well worthy of note, and this is that there are certain wells, or mines, of such excellent tar, that as many ships as require caulking might be caulked with it. This tar must be some mineral which flows out at this place, and it comes forth very hot. I have not seen any other mines of tar in any of the other parts of the Indies which I have visited, but I believe that Gonzalo Hernandez de Oviedo, in the first part of the General History of the Indies, gives an account both of this and of others. Nevertheless, as I am not writing concerning the Indies generally, but only of the events which have taken place in Peru, I do not treat of other parts. With this I shall conclude what I have to say concerning the city and province of Puerto Viejo. Chapter 54. Concerning the foundation of the city of Guayaquil, and how certain of the natives put the captains of Huaynacapac to death. Further on, towards the west, is the city of Guayaquil, and, as soon as the boundary of its jurisdiction is crossed, the Indians are Gancabulcas, those toothless ones who, from custom, or to honor their accursed gods, pulled out their teeth, as I have before said. As I have already given an account of their dress and customs, I have no wish to repeat it in this chapter. In the time of Tupac Inca Yupanqui, Lord of Cusco, these people were conquered. The Lord Inca subjugated them, and, in doing so, he proved himself to be a great captain, and won victories and notable trophies, displacing the garrisons of the natives, and allowing no armed men in any part except those who were posted at stations assigned by himself. He then ordered certain of his captains to explore the country, and to bring the natives to obedience by kindness and friendship. All these captains, as I have said before, were killed by the natives, without one being left alive. The natives did not at once receive the punishment they deserved for killing those who slept in confidence without suspecting such treason, because the Inca was in Cusco, and his governors and delegates had enough to do in their respective governments. When Huaynacapac succeeded, he showed himself to be as brave and valiant a captain as his father, with even more prudence, and full of pride at his new power. He set out from Cusco in great haste, accompanied by the principal or Jones of the two famous tribes of that city, called Henan Cuscos, and Huron Cuscos. After having visited the sacred temple of Pachacamac, and the garrisons which were stationed by his order in the provinces of Zaxa and Caxamarca, and other parts, both in the mountains and in the fruitful valleys of the coast, he reached Tumbay, where a fortress was built by his order, although some Indians say that this edifice is more ancient. The people of the island of Puna being hostile to the natives of Tumbay, it was easy for the captains of the Inca to build this fortress while the Indians were engaged in their own quarrels. When it was finished, Huayna Capac ordered a temple of the sun to be built, and 200 virgins, from amongst the most beautiful daughters of the chiefs of the province, to be collected together in it. In this fortress, which before it was ruined, is said to have been a thing worthy of notice, Huayna Capac had his captain or delegate, with a number of mitamis, and stores and provisions for their maintenance, as well as for the troops that passed that way. They also say that a lion and a very fierce tiger were placed in the fortress in order to be well guarded. These must have been the beasts which made as if they would tear the captain Pedro de Candia in pieces, at the time when the governor Don Francisco Pizarro, with his 13 companions, who were the discoverers of Peru, as I shall relate in the third part of my work, reached this coast. In the fortress of Tumbay there were a great number of silversmiths who made vases of gold and silver, and many other ornaments both for the service and adornment of the temple, which these people considered sacred, and for the use of the Inca himself. They also had to prepare the plates of these metals, to line the walls of the temples and palaces. The women, who were dedicated to the service of the temple, only understood how to spin and weave very fine woolen cloth, which they did with great skill. As I shall write very fully and copiously of these things in my second part, which will treat of the kingdom of the Incas in Peru, from Manco Capac, who was the first, to Huascar, who was the last, I shall say no more in this chapter than is necessary to make the narrative clear. As soon, then, as Huayna Capac had made himself master of the province of the Gangcavalcas and of Tumbay, he sent to Tumbala, the lord of Puna, to order him to come and do homage. When the lord of the island of Puna heard what the Inca's message conveyed, he was much moved, for, being a chief, and having received that dignity from his ancestors, he held it to be a great calamity to lose that liberty which is so much esteemed by all the nations of the earth, and to receive a stranger as sole lord of his island, for he was not only required to serve him, but to allow his edifices and fortresses to be built on the island, and to give up his most beautiful women, which was what he felt most. Finally, however, those of the island consulted one with another touching the present calamity, and, considering how small their power was to resist that of the Inca, they agreed that it would be prudent to seek for his friendship, and to feign submission. Tumbala then sent messengers to Huayna Capac with presents, and invited him to visit the island of Puna for a few days. The Inca was satisfied with this humility, and Tumbala, with the chiefs of the island, sacrificed to the gods, seeking what they should do to escape from the Inca, who sought to be supreme lord over all. It is said that messengers were sent to all the neighboring provinces to try the temper of the people, and to excite them to resist Huayna Capac. This was done very secretly, and in the meanwhile the Inca went to the island of Puna, where he was honorably received, and lodged in buildings which had been prepared for him. The Orjones and the chiefs of the island assembled, and showed signs of real and not simulated friendship. As many of the natives of the mainland desired to live as their ancestors had done, and as a foreign yoke is always heavy and distasteful, while that of a countryman is easy and light, they conspired with the natives of the island of Puna to kill all those who came into the country with the Inca. At that time Huayna Capac ordered certain of his captains, with a large force, to visit some of the villages on the mainland, and to arrange affairs connected with his service, and he ordered the islanders to convey them in balsas across the sea, and to disembark them in a river whence it would be convenient to go to their destination. Having arranged these and other matters on the island, Huayna Capac returned to Tumbay, or to some place near it. The Orjones, noble youths of Cusco, then got into the balsas, with their captains, a large and well-appointed fleet. They were crossing the water without suspicion, when the islanders treacherously unfastened the cords by which the poles of the balsas were secured, so that the poor Orjones fell into the water, where they were all cruelly murdered by the islanders with the arms which they had secretly brought with them. By killing some and drowning others, they put an end to all the Orjones, and nothing was left of them but some mantles and a few of their ornaments. As soon as the aggressors had committed these murders, their joy was very great, and they talked and complimented each other in the balsas to such an extent, that it might have been supposed that the Inca and all his troops were in their power. They enjoyed their victory, and appropriated the treasures and ornaments of these people of Cusco, but they finally met a fate very different from their thoughts, as I am about to relate. The Orjones who came in the balsas being dead, the murderers quickly returned to the place whence they had started, to take more people on board. The rest of the Orjones, unaware of the trick which had been played on their companions, then embarked with their clothes, ornaments, and provisions, and were all killed in the same way, so that not one escaped. If any that knew how to swim tried to save their lives, They were killed by fierce and cruel blows, and if they dived, and thus strove to fly from their enemies by seeking favor of the fishes that dwell in the depths of the sea, it was of no avail, for the islanders, who live much in the sea, employed in their fisheries, swim as well as the fishes, and easily overtook the fugitives and strangled them. The sea was full of blood, the sign of a sad spectacle. As soon as all the Orjones who went in the balsas were killed, those of Puna, with the other Indians who had conspired with them, returned to the island. When these events were made known to the king Winnekapak, he was enraged and deeply distressed that so many of his nobles should have no tombs. In truth, they think more of the building and adorning of their tombs where they are to be put after death, than of the houses where they dwell while living. Presently the Inca assembled all his remaining forces, and resolved to punish the barbarians in such a manner that neither resistance nor submission should avail them, for their offense was held to be so grave, that it was more necessary to punish with severity than to pardon with clemency and humanity. Thus thousands were put to death in various ways, and the chiefs who formed the conspiracy were impaled or hung. After he had inflicted a great and terrible punishment on these Indians, Winnekapak ordered that the misfortune which had befallen his followers should be recorded in songs, and sung in seasons of mourning, for such subjects are recited in their languages in elegies. He also ordered a causeway to be made along the river of Guayaquil, which, judging from some parts that may still be seen, must have been a superb work, but it was never finished. It is called the Passage of Winnekapak. Having inflicted this punishment, he ordered that all the natives should obey his governor, who was in the fortress of Tumbay, and having arranged other matters, the Inca departed from this province. There are other districts and villages within the jurisdiction of the city of Guayaquil, but I have nothing to say concerning them, except that the manners and dress of the inhabitants are the same as those already described, and that their country is the same. Chapter 55. Of the island of Puna, and of that of La Plata, and concerning the admirable root called sarsaparilla, which is so useful for all diseases. The island of Puna, which is near the port of Tumbay, is little more than 10 leagues round, yet in former times it was considered an important place, for, besides that the inhabitants are great traders, and possess in their islands all things needful to sustain human life, which are sufficient causes for their wealth, they are held to be valiant by their neighbors, and in ancient times they waged fierce wars with those of Tumbay and of other provinces. For very slight causes they killed each other, and seized their women and children. The great Tupac Inca sent ambassadors to these islanders, proposing that they should be his friends and allies, and they, owing to his great fame, heard his embassy, but refused to serve him, and they were not entirely subdued until the time of Winnekapak, although others say that they had been conquered and brought within the rule of the Incas by Inca Yupanqui, but that they had rebelled. However this may have been, the events connected with the murder of the captains, already described, certainly took place. These islanders are of middle height, and dark-skinned. They dress in cotton cloths, both men and women, and wear chackwires on several parts of the body. They also put on pieces of gold in order to look smart. The island is covered with large woods and flowering meadows, and abounds in fruit. It yields plenty of maize, yuccas, and other edible roots, and there are also birds of all kinds, such as parrots, guacamayas, and of beasts, monkeys, lions, foxes, snakes, and many others. When the chiefs die they are lamented by all the people, as well men as women, and are interred with great signs of respect, according to their custom. They bury the most valuable things, arms, and most beautiful women with the deceased, the women being buried alive in the tombs to keep their husbands company. They mourn for the dead during many days, and shave the heads of the women in the houses, even those who are the nearest relations. They are given to religious ceremonies, and to the commission of some crimes. The devil had the same power over them as he had over other Indians, and some of them conversed with him. They had their temples in dark and hidden places, and carved the walls with horrible pictures. In front of their altars, where they performed sacrifices, they killed many animals and some birds, and it is said that they even killed slaves or prisoners taken in war, offering up their blood to the accursed devil. In another small island, at no great distance, the natives say that, in the time of their ancestors, there was a temple, or waka, where they also worshipped their gods and performed sacrifices. Round the temple they had quantities of gold, silver, and other valuable things, such as woolen cloths and jewels, which had been offered up at different times. It is also said that some of the islanders of Puna committed the accursed sin. At present, by the will of God, they are not so bad, or, if they are, they do not commit their crimes publicly and openly, for there are clergy on the island now, and the natives are aware of the blindness in which their fathers lived, and how erroneous was their belief. They also know how much they gain by believing our holy Catholic faith, and by having Jesus Christ, our Redeemer, for their God. Thus, by His great goodness and mercy, many have become Christians, and more are converted every day. An herb grows in abundance on this island, and in the province of Guayaquil, which is called sarsaparilla because it grows like a bramble from its birth, and small leaves grow out of the suckers and other parts of the branches. The roots of the herb are useful for all sicknesses, and especially for buboes, and to mitigate the evil which this pestiferous disease causes to man. Those who wish to be cured are put in a warm room, well covered up, so that the cold or air can do no injury. Then, by merely purging, eating delicate meats, and drinking an infusion of this root for some days, without any other remedy, the evil is cleared out of the body, and shortly the patient is more healthy than he ever was before, and the body is left without any vestige of the evil, but remains so perfect that it seems as if it had never been ailing. Thus they have truly effected great cures in the town of Guayaquil at different times. Many, too, whose bowels are out of order, by simply drinking an infusion of these roots, become healthy, and in better condition than before they were taken ill. Others suffering from buboes are also cured, as well as those with boils or tumors. I take it for certain that this is the best root and herb in the world, and the most useful, as is proved by the numbers who have been cured by it. This sarsaparilla grows in many parts of the Indies, but none is so good or efficacious as that which is found on the island of Puna and in the province of the city of Guayaquil. Chapter 56. How the city of Santiago de Guayaquil was founded and settled, of some Indian villages which are subject to it, and concerning other things until its boundary is passed. That it may be known how the city of Santiago de Guayaquil was founded, it will be necessary to say something concerning it, although, in the third part of my work, I shall treat more fully on the subject, in the place where the discovery of Quito and conquest of these provinces by the Captain Don Sebastian Belalcázar is narrated. This officer, having full powers from the Adelantado Don Francisco Pizarro, and hearing of the province of Guayaquil, determined to found a city within its limits. He, therefore, started from San Miguel with a party of Spaniards, and, entering the province, induced the natives to come to terms, giving them to understand that their natural lord and king was His Majesty. As the Indians already knew that San Miguel, Puerto Viejo, and Quito itself, were peopled by Christians, many of them came forward to make peace, so the Captain Sebastian de Belalcázar chose a place which seemed to him proper for the site of a city, but he remained there only a few days, because it was necessary for him to return to Quito. He left one Diego Daza as captain and alcalde, and it was not long before the Indians began to understand the exacting spirit and avarice of the Spaniards, their greed for gold and silver, and their desire after pretty women. As the Spaniards were also divided amongst themselves, the Indians conspired to kill them, and as they determined so they acted, the Spaniards being very incautious. All were killed except 5 or 6 soldiers and their chief, Diego Daza. These, amidst great dangers and difficulties, escaped to Quito, but the Captain Belalcázar had already set out to discover the provinces further to the north, leaving as his lieutenant a captain of good lineage, named Juan Diaz. When the news was heard in Quito, several Christians returned with the same Diego Daza and the Captain Tapia, and had several fights with the Indians, who had encouraged and animated each other to defend their persons and property. The Spaniards made proposals of peace, but without avail, for the natives were full of hatred and animosity. They showed these feelings by killing several Christians and horses, and the rest retreated to Quito. These events having occurred, the governor Don Francisco Pizarro sent the Captain Cieza to form this settlement. He entered the province afresh, with the intention of dividing the villages amongst the Spaniards who accompanied him on this conquest, but the governor recalled him in great haste to relieve the city of the kings, which was besieged by the Indians. The new city was therefore again abandoned, owing to this order of the governor. Some time afterwards the Captain Francisco de Orellana entered the province, by order of the Adelantado Don Francisco Pizarro, with a larger force of Spaniards and horses. He founded the city of Santiago de Guayaquil in a better position, in the name of His Majesty, Don Francisco Pizarro being Governor and Captain General of Peru, in the year 1537. Many of the Gancavalcas Indians served the Spanish citizens of this city of Santiago de Guayaquil, and, besides the city, the towns of Yacuil, Kernch, Chanduy, Chongan, Dale, Canana, and many others are within the limits and jurisdiction of the province. All these places have fertile lands well supplied with provisions and abundance of fruit, and in the hollows of the trees there is much excellent honey. Near the city there are wide open plains, forests, and thickets of tall trees. Rivers of good water flow down from the mountains. The Indians, both men and women, dress in shirts, with cloths between their legs. On their heads they wear crowns of very small gold beads, called chaquira, and some of silver. The women wear one mantle from the waist downwards, and another over their shoulders, and their hair is worn very long. In some of these villages the caciques or chiefs fasten bits of gold on their teeth. It is said by some of them that when they sowed their fields, they sacrificed human blood and the hearts of men to him whom they reverenced as God, and that in every village there were old Indians who conversed with the devil. When the chiefs were sick, to appease the wrath of their gods, and pray for health, they made other sacrifices of a superstitious nature, killing men, as I was told, and believing that human blood was a grateful offering. In doing these things they sounded drums and bells before certain idols shaped like lions or tigers, which they worshipped. When any of the chiefs died, they made a round tomb with a vaulted roof, and the door towards the rising sun. The body was buried with live women, his arms, and other things, in the same way as was done by the Indians already described. The arms with which these Indians fight are wands, and clubs called macanas. Most of these Indians have died out and come to an end. Those that remain are, by the will of God, becoming Christians, and little by little forgetting their evil customs as they embrace our holy faith. It now appears to me that I have said enough concerning the cities of Puerto Viejo and Guayaquil, so I will return to the royal road of the Incas, which I left after reaching the buildings of Tumabamba. Chapter 57. Of the Indian villages between the buildings of Tumabamba and the city of Loxa, and concerning the founding of that city. Setting out from Tumabamba, in the direction of Cusco, the great road passes through the province of the Canaries, until it reaches Canaribamba and the buildings a little further on. Villages belonging to the same province are seen on either hand, and to the eastward there are mountains, on the other side of which the country, which is inhabited, slopes down towards the river Marañón. Beyond the boundary of these Canaris Indians is the province of the Paltas, in which there are some buildings now known as the Stones, because many are to be seen which the Incas, in the time of their power, had sent to their superintendents or delegates. These tampas were ordered to be built, because the province of the Paltas was considered important. They were extensive and handsome, the masonry being well executed. The quarry whence the stones were brought is near the source of the river of Tumbay. Here the tribute was collected, which the natives were obliged to pay to their king and lord, or to the governors in his name. To the westward of these buildings is the city of Puerto Viejo, and to the eastward the province of Bracamoras, where there are vast territories and many rivers, some of them very great and powerful. There is hope that by marching for 20 or 30 days, a rich and fertile land will be reached. But there are great forests in the way, some of them very frightful and dangerous. The Indians go naked, and are not so intelligent as those of Peru, nor were they subdued by the king's Incas. They are not so civilized, nor have they any polity, any more than the Indians subject to the city of Antioquia, or to the town of Arma, or those in the government of Popayan. These Indians of the province of Bracamoras resemble those mentioned above in their customs, and they are said to be very valiant warriors. Even the very Orjones of Cusco confess that Huayna turned and fled before their fury. The captain Pedro de Vergara was occupied for some years in making discoveries and conquests in this region, and founded a settlement in it, but the troubles of Peru prevented its complete exploration, and the Spaniards entered it 2 or 3 times in the course of the civil wars. Afterwards the president, Pedro de la Gasca, sent the captain Diego Palomino, a citizen of the town of San Miguel, to undertake this discovery. When I was in the city of the kings, certain conquerors arrived to give an account of what they had done for the said president and the judges. As the Dr. Bravo de Saravia, a judge of the royal audience, is very curious, they gave him a particular account of what had been discovered. In truth, any captain who set out in that direction with a sufficient force, would bring to light a very rich land, as I learned from the reports I have heard. But, although I have heard that the captain Diego Palomino settled in those parts, yet I shall say no more, as I have not obtained any certain intelligence, and what I have already said is sufficient for the understanding of what may have been done. The distance from the province of Canaris to the city of Loxa, which is also called La Sarsa, is 17 leagues, the whole road being rugged or boggy, and halfway is the town of the Paltas, as I have already said. Soon after leaving the building of the stones, an ascent commences which lasts a little more than 10 leagues. Here it is very cold, and at the end of the descent there is another building called Tamba Blanco, whence the royal road leads to a river called Catamaya. On the right-hand side, near the same river, is the city of Loxa, which was founded by the captain Alonso de Mercadillo, in the name of His Majesty, in the year of our Lord 1546. There are numerous villages around the city of Loxa, and the natives have almost the same customs as those in the neighboring districts. They wear a particular fringe, or band, on their heads to distinguish them. They perform sacrifices, and worship the sun as well as other more common objects, but, like the other Indians, they believed in a creator of all things. As regards the immortality of the soul, they all understand that man is composed of something more than the mere mortal body. When their chiefs die, deceived by the devil, in common with all the other Indians, they bury women alive with the bodies. Now, however, As some of them understand that it profits nothing to persevere in their ancient evil practices, they will not kill women by burying them with dead bodies, nor are they now so particular in this matter of sepulture. Indeed, they laugh at those who still continue the customs which their ancestors considered of such importance. Not only do they refrain from spending so much time in making these tombs, but, on the approach of death, they desire to be interred like Christians in small and humble graves. This is done by those who, having been washed in the most holy water of baptism, deserve to be called the servants of God and the sheep of his pasture. But there are many thousands of old Indians who are now as bad as they ever were, and will continue to be so until the goodness and mercy of God brings them to a true knowledge of his laws. These desire their bodies to be placed in secret places, far from the roads and villages frequented by Christians, on lofty mountains, or amidst snow-covered rocks, wrapped in richly colored mantles, with all the gold they possess. Most of the villages subject to the city of Loxa were under the rule of the Incas, ancient lords of Peru, who, as I have said in many parts of this history, had their court in the city of Cusco, which was always the capital of these provinces, and, notwithstanding that many of the natives were dull and stupid, they abandoned their barbarous ways, and became more civilized by contact with the Incas. The climate of these provinces is pleasant and healthy, and in the valleys and on the banks of rivers it is more temperate than on the mountains. The cultivated part of the mountains is good land, but rather cold, and the snowy rocks and desert places are intensely so. There are many guanacos and vicunas, which are like their sheep, and partridges, some a little smaller than domestic fowls, and others larger than doves. On the banks of the rivers there are flowering shrubs, and many fruit trees of the country. The Spaniards have now planted pear, fig, orange, and other trees of Spain. In the district of Loxa they also breed large herds of swine of the Spanish sort, goats, and sheep, for there is excellent pasture and many streams of water flowing in all directions, which descend from the mountains. There are hopes that the district may contain rich mines of gold and silver, and some have already been discovered. The Indians, now that they are secure from the turmoils of war, and are the masters of their persons and property, raise many Spanish fowls, pigeons, and other birds. Pulses grow well in the district. The natives of the country round Loxa are of middle height, and dress in shirts and mantles, both men and women. Within the forests, it is affirmed by the natives that there are numerous tribes rich in gold, and some large rivers. These tribes go naked, both men and women, for the country is hotter than Peru, and was never subjugated by the Incas. The Captain Alonso de Mercadillo, with a force of Spaniards, set out in the year 1550 to verify these reports. The situation of the city of Loxa is the best and most convenient that could be found within the province. The repartimientos of Indians held by the citizens were first obtained in encomienda by those who were in Quito and San Miguel. As the Spaniards who traveled by the royal road, to go to Quito and other parts, ran risks from the Indians of Caracamba and Chaparra, this city was founded, and, notwithstanding that Gonzalo Pizarro had ordered it to be peopled while he was engaged in his rebellion, still the President Pedro de la Gasca, considering that it would be for the service of His Majesty that it should not be abandoned, approved of its being founded, and after the judgment on Gonzalo Pizarro, he gave Indians to the settlers. It appears to me that I have now said enough concerning this city, so I shall pass on, and treat of the other cities in this kingdom. Chapter 58. Concerning the provinces between Tamboplanco and the city of San Miguel, the first city founded by the Christian Spaniards in Peru, and what there is to be said of the natives. As I have undertaken in this work to satisfy the reader on all points worthy of note concerning the kingdom of Peru, although it will be great trouble to me to stop at one place and return to another, still I shall not fail to do so when it is necessary. In this place I shall treat of the foundation of San Miguel, the first city founded by Christian Spaniards in Peru, and of the valleys and sandy deserts in this great kingdom, leaving the grand road over the mountains once more. I shall fully describe these provinces and valleys on the coast, along which runs another grand road made by the kings Incas, of the same magnitude as that in the mountains. I shall give an account of the Yuncas, and of their great edifices, as well as of the information I obtained concerning the secret of its never raining in these valleys and sandy deserts, and of the great abundance of things necessary for the support of man. Having done all this, I shall return to my mountain road, and follow it until I come to the end of this first part. But, before descending to the coast, traveling along the same royal mountain road, we come to the provinces of Calva and Ayavaca, which have the forests of Bracamoris on the east, and the city of San Miguel, of which I shall treat presently, on the west. In the province of Caxas there are great buildings, erected by the orders of the Incas, and formerly occupied by a governor and a number of mitimes, who had charge of the collection of tribute. Beyond Caxas is the province of Huancabamba, where there were still larger buildings than in Caxas, for here the Incas had their forces, and amongst the buildings there is a great fortress which I saw, but it was then in ruins. In Huancabamba there was a temple of the sun, with a number of women. The people of the surrounding districts came to worship and offer gifts at this temple, and the virgins and priests were held in great reverence and esteem. The tribute of the chiefs of all these provinces was brought here, and was forwarded to Cusco when orders came to that effect. Beyond Huancabamba there are other buildings and villages, some of them under the jurisdiction of Loxa, while the natives of others have been granted in encomienda to the citizens of San Miguel. In times past these Indians had wars amongst themselves, and for very slight causes they killed each other and seized the women. It is even said that they went naked, and that some of them ate human flesh, like the natives of the province of Popayan. When the Incas conquered and subjugated them, they lost many of these customs, and adopted the polity which they now have. Thus their villages were ordered after a different fashion to that which had formerly prevailed. They wear clothes made of fine wool from their flocks, and now instead of eating human flesh, they detest the practice and hold it to be a great sin. Although they are so near the tribes of Puerto Viejo and Guayaquil, they do not commit the abominable sin. They declare that, before they were subjugated by the Inca Yupanqui and by Tupac Inca his son, who was father of Huayna Capac, and grandfather of Atahualpa, they defended their liberties so resolutely, that many thousands were killed, and as many of the Orjones of Cusco, but they were so closely pressed that, to escape destruction, certain of their chiefs, in the name of the rest, gave in their submission to the lords Incas. The men of these districts are dark, and good-looking, and both they and the women clothe themselves in the way they learnt from the Incas, their ancient lords. In some parts they wear the hair very long, and in others short and plaited in very small plaits. If any hairs grow on the chin, they pull them out, and, strange to say, this is done wherever Indians are met with in these lands. They all understand the general language of Cusco, but they also have their own particular languages, as I have already said. There used to be great flocks of llamas, the sheep of Peru, but now there are very few, owing to the way the Spaniards have destroyed them. The clothes of these Indians are of llama wool, and also of vacuna wool, which is better and finer. There are also some guanacos, which frequent the desert heights. Those who cannot get clothes made of wool, use cotton. In the valleys and inhabited meadows there are many rivers and small brooks, and some fountains with good and wholesome water. In all parts there is herbage for flocks and plenty of provisions for man. There are priests in most of these districts, who, if they live well and abstain from evil, as their religion requires, will reap great fruits. By the will of God, this is done in the greater part of the kingdom, and many Indian lads have become Christians, who, by their example, attract others. The ancient temples, which are generally called huacas, are now ruined and desecrated, the idols are broken, and the devil is thus badly wounded in these places. Where he was once, for the sins of men, so reverenced and esteemed, the cross is now planted. Truly we Spaniards should ever give infinite praise to our Lord God for this. Chapter 59. In which the narrative is continued down to the foundation of the city of San Miguel, and who was the founder. Also of the difference of the seasons in this kingdom of Peru, which is a notable thing, and how it does not rain along the whole length of these plains, which are on the coast of the South Sea. The city of San Miguel is the first that was founded in this kingdom, by the Marquis Don Francisco Pizarro, and here the first temple was raised in honor of God our Lord. To describe the coast valleys, I must begin with the valley of Tumbay, through which flows a river which rises, as I have before said, in the province of Paltas, and falls into the South Sea. The land of this valley of Tumbay is naturally very dry and sterile, but it sometimes rains, and showers even extend to near the city of San Miguel. But these showers take place in the parts nearest to the mountains, and it never rains in the vicinity of the sea coast. The valley of Tumbay was formerly thickly peopled and well cultivated, full of beautiful fresh watercourses drawn from the river to irrigate the land, and yielded maize and other things necessary for the support of man, besides plenty of delicious fruit. The ancient chiefs of the valley, before they were subjugated by the Incas, were dreaded and obeyed by their subjects in a greater degree than any other chiefs of whom I have yet written, as is notorious to all, and they were served with much ceremony. They dressed in mantles and shirts, and wore an ornament on their heads, consisting of a circlet of wool adorned with pieces of gold and silver, and very small beads, called chaquira. These Indians were addicted to their religion, and were great sacrificers, as is stated at large in my account of the founding of the cities of Puerto Viejo and Guayaquil. They are very industrious laborers in the fields, and carry heavy burdens. They till the ground in concert, with beautiful regularity, and raise maize and many kinds of well-tasted roots. The maize yields a harvest twice in the year, and the beans and peas also come up abundantly when they are sown. Their clothes are made of cotton, which they grow in the valley, according to the quantity they require. These natives of Tumbay also have a great fishery, from which they derive no small profit, for with it, and their trade to the mountains, they have always been rich. From this valley of Tumbay a journey of 2 days brings the traveler to the valley of Solana, which was thickly peopled in former days, and contained edifices and storehouses. The royal road of the Incas passes through these valleys, with pleasant shady trees on either side. Leaving Solana, the road next comes to Pochios, on a river also called Pochios, though some call it the Macahuilca, because there is a chief or lord of that name in the valley. This valley was once very thickly populated indeed, as we are led to suppose from the numerous remains of great buildings. These buildings, though now in ruins, prove that the valley was as populous as the natives describe, and they also show the great estimation in which the kings Incas held this place, for here there were royal palaces and other buildings. Time and wars have so entirely obliterated them that nothing can be seen now but vast numbers of great tombs of those dead who once cultivated all the fields in this valley. 2 more days' journey beyond Pochios bring us to the great and wide valley of Piura, where 2 or 3 rivers unite, which is the reason why this valley is so broad. In it is built the city of San Miguel. Although this city is now held in little estimation, the repartimientos being small and poor, it is just to remember that it deserves privileges and honor, because it was the beginning of all the cities that have since been built, and is on the site selected by the brave Spaniards, before the great Lord Atahualpa was seized by them. At first the city was founded on the site called Tangarara, which was abandoned on account of its unhealthiness. It is now built between 2 very pleasant level valleys, full of trees. It is said to be rather unhealthy, and the people suffer in their eyes from the wind and dust of summer and the dampness of winter. They say that it never rains in this district, but some dew falls from heaven, and, at intervals of a few years, a heavy shower of rain comes down. The valley is like that of Tumbay, and there are many vines, figs, and other trees of Spain growing in it. This city of San Miguel was founded by the Adelantado Don Francisco Pizarro, governor of Peru, then called New Castile, in the name of His Majesty, and in the year of our Lord 1531. Before going any further, it seems well that I should say what I have learnt in the matter of there being no rain. In the mountains summer commences in April, and lasts during May, June, July, August, and September. In October winter begins, and lasts during November, December, January, February, and March, so that there is little difference in the seasons between this land and our Spain. The fields are plowed in the proper seasons, and the days and nights are almost equal. The time when the days increase a little and are longest, is during the month of November. But in the coast valleys bordering on the South Sea, the seasons are opposite to what I have here described, for when it is summer in the mountains it is winter on the coast, where we begin the summer in October, lasting till April, and then the winter commences. It is truly a strange thing to consider this great difference in the same country. What is still more worthy of note is, that you may start in the morning from a country where it is raining, and, before Vespers, you will find yourself in another where it never rains. From the beginning of October it never rains in any of the coast valleys, except in such small showers as scarcely to lay the dust. For this reason the inhabitants are dependent upon irrigation, and do not cultivate more land than what the rivers can irrigate, for everywhere else, by reason of the sterility, not even a blade of grass will grow, but all is an intensely dry, stony, or sandy waste, where nothing is seen but a tree with few leaves and no fruit. In some parts there are thorn bushes and cacti, in others nothing but sand. What they call winter on the coast is nothing more than the season when clouds arise, which look as if they were charged with plenty of rain, but nothing comes of it save a drizzle so light that it barely damps the ground. It is a strange thing that though, as I have said, the heavens are well charged with clouds, yet it does not rain more than these slight showers. At the same time, some days pass during which the sun is not seen, being concealed by the thickness of the clouds. As the mountains are so high, and the coast valleys so low, it would appear that the former attract the clouds to themselves without allowing them to abide in the low lands. And when it is the natural time for rain, it falls in the mountains, while there is none in the plains, but, on the contrary, great heat. On the other hand, the light showers fall on the coast when the region of the mountains is clear and rainless. There is another curious thing, which is that there is only one wind on this coast, and that is from the south, and although the wind from that quarter is moist and attracts rain in other countries, it is not so here, and this wind prevails continually along the coast as far as Tumbay. Further up the coast, as there are other winds, it rains, and the winds are accompanied by heavy showers. I do not know the natural reason for these things, but it is clear that this sterile rainless region extends from 4 degrees south of the equinoctial line to beyond the Tropic of Capricorn. Another thing, very worthy of note, is, that on the equinoctial line in some parts it is hot and moist, and in others cold and dry, but this land of the coast of Peru is hot and dry, while on either side it rains. I have gathered all this from what I have myself seen, and he who can assign natural reasons for these things, let him do so. As for me, I have said what I saw, and can do no more. Chapter 60. Concerning the road which the Incas ordered to be made along these coast valleys, with buildings and depots like those in the mountains, and why these Indians are called Yuncas. That my writings may be conducted with all possible regularity, I wish, before returning, to conclude what there is to be said about the provinces in the mountains, and to relate what is worthy of remark on the coast, which, as I have said in other parts, is important. In this place I will give an account of the grand road which the Incas ordered to be made along the coast valleys, which, although now it is in ruins in many places, still shows how grand a work it once was, and how great was the power of those who ordered it to be made. Huayna Capac, and Tupac Inca Yupanqui, his father, were those who, according to the Indians, descended to the coast and visited all the valleys and provinces of the Yuncas, although some say that Inca Yupanqui, the grandfather of Huayna Capac and father of Tupac Inca, was the first who saw the coast and traversed its deserts. The caciques and officers, by order of the Incas, made a road 15 feet wide through these coast valleys, with a strong wall on each side. The whole space of this road was smooth and shaded by trees. These trees, in many places, spread their branches laden with fruit over the road, and many birds fluttered amongst the leaves. In every valley there was a principal station for the Incas, with depots of provisions for the troops. If anything was not ready, a severe punishment was inflicted, and if any of those whose duty it was to traverse the road, entered the fields or dwellings of the Indians, although the damage they did was small, they were ordered to be put to death. The walls on each side extended from one place to another, except where the sand drifted so high that the Indians could not pave the road with cement, when huge posts, like beams, were driven in at regular intervals to point out the way. Care was taken to keep the road clean, to renew any part of the walls that was out of repair, and to replace any of the posts which might be displaced by the wind in the deserts. This coast road was certainly a great work, though not so difficult as that over the mountains. There were some fortresses and temples of the sun, which I shall mention in their proper places. As, in many parts of the work, I shall have to use the words Inca and Yunca, I will satisfy the reader as to the meaning of Yunca, as I have already done with regard to Inca. He will understand, then, that the towns and provinces of Peru are situated in the manner I have already described, many of them in the openings formed by the snowy mountains of the Andes. All those who live in these mountains are called serranos, and those who inhabit the coast are called Yuncas, and in many parts of the mountains where the rivers flow, as the mountains are very high, the plains are sheltered and warm, and in some of them there is as much heat as there is on the coast. The inhabitants who live in these warm valleys and plains, although they are strictly in the mountains, are also called Yuncas. Throughout Peru, when they speak of these warm and sheltered places between the mountains, they call them Yuncas, and the inhabitants have no other name, though they may have in their own districts. Thus, those who live in the parts already mentioned, and all who live in the coast valleys of Peru, are called Yuncas, because they live in a warm land. Chapter 61. How these Yuncas were very superstitious, and how they were divided into nations and lineages. Before I proceed to describe the valleys of the coast, and the founding of the three cities, of the kings, of Truxillo, and of Arequipa, I will here recount a few things, that I may not have to repeat them over again, both those I saw myself, and those which I learned from Fray Domingo de Santo Tomas. This friar is one of those who understand the language well, and he has been a long time among the Indians, teaching them the truths of our holy Catholic faith. Thus, my account of these coast valleys will be founded on what I saw and learned when I traveled through them myself, and on the information given me by Fray Domingo. The native lords of these valleys were, in ancient times, feared and obeyed by their subjects, who served them with much ceremony, according to their usage. These lords were attended by buffoons and dancers, who were always jesting, while others played and sang. They had many wives, taking care that they should be the prettiest that could be found. Each lord had a great building in his valley, with many adobe pillars, extensive terraces, and doorways hung with matting. Round the building there was an open space where they had their dances. When the lord ate, a great concourse of people assembled, and drank their beverage made from maize or from roots. In these buildings there were porters, whose duty it was to guard the doors and see who entered or came out. All were clothed in cotton shirts and long mantles, the women as well as the men, except that the dress of the women was large and broad like a morning gown, with openings at the sides for the arms. Some of the lords waged war upon each other, and in some parts the people were never able to learn the language of Cusco. Although there were 3 or 4 tribes of these Yuncas, they all had the same rites and customs. They spent many days and nights at their banquets and drinking bouts, and certainly it is marvelous the quantity of chicha that these Indians drink, indeed the glass is scarcely ever out of their hands. They used to receive the Spaniards with great hospitality when they passed near their dwellings, and to treat them honorably. Now they do not do so, because, when the Spaniards broke the peace, and contended with each other in civil wars. They were detested by the Indians on account of the cruel way in which they treated them, and also because some of the governors have been guilty of such meanness, that the Indians no longer treat those well who pass near their dwellings, pretending to think that those are servants whom they used to treat as lords. The fault lies in those who have been sent here to govern, some of whom have considered that the old order of things was bad, and that it was wrong to keep the natives under their ancient polity, which, if it had been preserved, would neither have destroyed their liberties, nor failed to bring them nearer to the way of good living and conversion, for it appears to me that few nations in the world had a better government than these Incas. I approve of nothing in the present rule, but rather deplore the extortion, cruel treatment, and violent deaths with which the Spaniards have visited these Indians, without considering the nobility and great virtue of their nation. Nearly all the rest of these valleys are now almost deserted, having once been so densely peopled, as is well known to many persons. Chapter 62. How the Indians of these valleys and of other parts of the country believe that souls leave the bodies, and do not die, and why they desired their wives to be buried with them. Many times in this history I have said that, in the greater part of the kingdom of Peru, it is a custom much used and observed by all the Indians to inter, with their dead, all their precious things, and some of the most beautiful and best beloved of their wives. It appears that this custom was observed in other parts of the Indies, from which it may be inferred that the devil manages to deceive one set of people in the same way as he does another. I was in Senu, which falls within the province of Carthagena, in the year 1535, when so vast a quantity of burial places were found on a level plain, near a temple raised in honor of the accursed devil, that it was a thing worthy of admiration. Some of them were so ancient, that there were tall trees growing on them, and they got more than 1,000,000 from these sepulchres, besides what the Indians took, and what was lost in the ground. In other parts great treasure has been, and is every day, found in the tombs. It is not many years since Juan de la Torre, who was Gonzalo Pizarro's captain in the valley of Ica, which is one of the Peruvian coast valleys, found one of these tombs, from which those who entered it affirm that he took more than $50,000. The custom of these Indians, in ordering magnificent and lofty tombs to be made, adorned with tiles and vaulted roofs, and in burying with the dead all his goods, his wives, great store of victuals, and no small quantity of chicha, or wine used by them, with their arms and ornaments, leads us to believe that they had some knowledge of the immortality of the soul, and of there being more in man than his mortal body. Deceived by the devil, they obey his commands, and he, according to their own account, gives them to understand that, after death, they will be brought to life in another place which is prepared for them, where they will eat and drink at their pleasure, as they did before they died. In order that they may believe that what he tells them is true, and not false and deceitful, he sometimes, when the will of God is served by giving him the power and permitting it, takes the form of some one of the dead chiefs, and, showing himself in the chief's proper shape and figure, such as he had when in this world, gives them to understand that the said chief is in another pleasant world in the form in which they there see him. Owing to these sayings and illusions of the devil, certain of these Indians, holding all these false appearances to be realities, take more pains in adorning their sepulchres or tombs than in any other thing. When a chief dies, they bury him with his treasure, and his wives, youths, and persons with whom he had much friendship when alive, are also buried. From what I have said, it seems that it was the general opinion of all these Indians Yuncas, and even of those in the territory of this kingdom of Peru, that the souls of the dead did not die, but lived forever, and that they would all meet each other, and eat and drink, which is their chief delight. Holding these opinions for certain, they buried with dead men their most beloved wives and most trusted servants, together with all their arms, treasures, plumes, and other personal ornaments. Many of the companions of a dead chief, for whom there was no room in the tomb, would make holes in the fields belonging to him, or in the places where he used generally to hold festivals, and there be buried, thinking that his soul would pass by these places and take them in his company to do him service. And some of the women, in order that their faithful service might be held in more esteem, finding that there was delay in completing the tomb, would hang themselves up by their own hair, and so kill themselves. We believe that all these things are done, because the accounts of the Indians concerning them are confirmed by the contents of the tombs, and because, in many parts, the Indians believe in and retain their accursed customs. I recollect, when I was in the government of Carthagena, more than 12 or 13 years ago, the licentiate Juan de Video being then governor and judge, that a boy came from a village called Parina, and fled to the place where Video then was, because they wanted to bury him alive with the chief of the village, who died at that time. Alaya, who was lord of the greater part of the valley of Zoxa, died about 2 years ago, and they say that a great number of women and servants were buried alive with him. If I am not deceived, they told this to the President Gasca, and though he gave the other chiefs to understand that they had committed a great sin, his discourse was without fruit. All over Peru they call the devil Supai. I have heard that he has been seen by them many times. They even affirm that in the valley of Lyle he entered the bodies stuffed with cinders that are there, saying many things to the people. Friar Domingo, who is, as I have already said, a notable searcher into these secrets, relates that when a certain person was sent to call Don Polyu, the son of Huayna Capac, whom the people received as Inca, he heard a servant say that, near the fortress of Cusco, there were loud voices crying with a great noise, "Why, Inca, dost thou not observe the customs that thou art bound to observe? Eat and drink, for soon thou must cease to eat and drink." These voices were heard by him who was sent to Don Polyu, during 5 or 6 nights. Such are the wiles of the devil, and the nooses with which he arms himself, to catch the souls of those who esteem sorcerers so highly. All the chiefs and Indians of the coast valleys have peculiar headdresses, by which one tribe is known from another. In our time they are abandoning their old rites, and the devil has neither influence, nor temple, nor public oracle among them, for they are finding out his deceitfulness, so that they are not now so bad as they were before they heard the word of the Holy Gospel. But this will not avail if the grace of God does not lessen their eating, drinking, and lasciviousness, in which they are engaged day and night without tiring. Chapter 63. How they buried their dead, and how they mourned for them, at the performance of their obsequies. In the previous chapter I recounted all there is to be said concerning the belief of these Indians in the immortality of the soul, and what the enemy of the human race makes them think concerning it. It now seems good to me that in this place I should give some account of their mode of burying their dead. In this there are great differences, for in some parts they make holes, in others they place their dead on heights, in others on level ground, and each nation seeks some new way of making tombs. Certain it is that, though I have made many inquiries, and talked with learned and curious men, I have not been able to ascertain the origin of these Indians, nor of their customs. These Indians, then, have various ways of constructing their tombs. In the Callao, as I shall relate in its place, they make them in the cultivated land in the form of towers, some large and others small, and some built with great skill. These towers have their doors opening towards the rising sun, and near them, as I will also relate presently, they were accustomed to make sacrifices and to burn certain things, sprinkling the towers with the blood of lambs and of other animals. In the district round Cusco they bury their dead in a sitting posture, on certain seats called dujos, dressed and adorned with their most precious ornaments. In the province of Zaxa, which is a very important part of these kingdoms of Peru, they sew their dead up in fresh sheepskins, with the face exposed, and thus they are kept in their own houses. The bodies of chiefs and principal men are, at certain seasons of the year, taken out by their sons, and carried to the cultivated fields and homesteads in a litter with great ceremony, and sacrifices of sheep and lambs, and even of women and boys, are offered up. When the Archbishop Don Hieronimo de Loisa heard of this, he sent strict orders to the Indians of the district, and to the clergy who were there teaching the doctrine of the Church, that all the bodies were to be immediately buried. In many other provinces, through which I have passed, they bury their dead in very deep holes, while in others, as those within the jurisdiction of the city of Antioquia, they pile up such masses of earth in making their tombs, that they look like small hills. A door is left through which they pass in the body, the live women, and all the things that are buried with it. In Senu many of the tombs are level and large, with courtyards, and others are like rocks or small hills. In the province of Chincha, which is one of the coast valleys of Peru, they bury their dead on beds made of canes. In another of these valleys, called Runahuanac, they bury their dead sitting. These Indians also differ in the way they inter the bodies, some of them putting them feet first, and others in a sitting posture. The Indians of many of these coast valleys have great walls made, where the rocks and barren mountains commence, in the way from the valleys to the Sierra. In these places each family has its established place for burying its dead, where they dig great holes and excavations, with closed doors before them. It is certainly a marvelous thing to see the great quantity of dead bodies that there are in these sandy and barren mountains, with their clothes now worn out and moldering away with time. They call these places, which they hold to be sacred, Waka, a mournful name. Many have been opened, and the Spaniards, when they conquered the country, found a great quantity of gold and silver in them. In these valleys the custom is very general of burying precious things with the dead, as well as many women and the most confidential servants possessed by the chief when alive. In former times they used to open the tombs, and renew the clothes and food which were placed in them, and when a chief died the principal people of the valley assembled, and made great lamentations. Many women cut off their hair until none was left, and came forth with drums and flutes, making mournful sounds, and singing in those places where the dead chief used to make merry, so as to make the hearers weep. Having made their lamentations, they offered up more sacrifices, and had superstitious communion with the devil. Having done this, and killed some of the women, they put them in the tomb, with the treasure and no small quantity of food, holding it for certain that they would go to that country concerning which the devil had told them. They had, and still have, the custom of mourning for the dead before the body is placed in the tomb, during 4, 5, or 6 days, or 10, according to the importance of the deceased, for the greater the Lord the more honor do they show him, lamenting with much sighing and groaning, and playing sad music. They also repeat all that the dead man had done while living, in their songs, and if he was valiant they recount his deeds in the midst of their lamentations. When they put the body into the tomb, they burn some ornaments and cloths near it, and put others with the body. Many of these ceremonies are now given up, because God no longer permits it, and because by degrees these people are finding out the errors of their fathers, and how little these vain pomps and honors serve them. They are learning that it suffices to inter the bodies in common graves, as Christians are interred, without taking anything with them other than good works. In truth, all other things but serve to please the devil, and to send the soul down to hell more heavily weighted. Nevertheless, most of the old chiefs order that their bodies are to be buried in the manner above described, in secret and hidden places, that they may not be seen by the Christians, and that they do this is known to us from the talk of the younger men. Chapter 64. No content. Chapter 65. How they have a custom of naming children, in most of these provinces, and how they sought after sorceries and charms. One thing that I observed during the time that I was in these kingdoms of Peru was, that they are accustomed to name their children, in most of the provinces, when they are 15 or 20 days old. This name is retained until they are 10 or 12 years old, when they receive another, the relations and friends of the father having previously been assembled on a certain day which is set apart for such purposes. They dance and drink according to their usual custom, and then one of them, who is the oldest and most respected, cuts the hair and nails of the boy or girl who receives the new name. The hair and nails are preserved with great care. The names which they receive are those of villages, birds, plants, or fish. I learnt these particulars because an Indian servant whom I employed was called Urco, which means sheep, another was called Lama, also a name for sheep, and another Pisk, which means a bird. Some of the Indians are careful to retain the names of their fathers and grandfathers. The chiefs and principal men seek out names according to their pleasure. For Atahualpa, the Inca whom the Spaniards captured in the province of Caxamarca, means a fowl, and his father was called Huayna, which signifies a rich youth. These Indians hold it to be unlucky for a mother to bring forth 2 babes at once, or when a child is born with any natural defect, such as having 6 fingers on one hand. If these things happen, the man and his wife become sad, and fast, without eating ají or drinking chicha, which is their wine, and they do other things according to their customs, as they have learnt them from their fathers. These Indians also believe much in signs and wonders. If a star falls, the noise they make is prodigious. There are many sorcerers among them, and they take great note of the moon and the planets. There are some Christians now alive who were with the Marquis Don Francisco Pizarro when he seized Atahualpa in the province of Caxamarca, and they saw a green sign in the sky, in the middle of the night, as broad as a cubit, and as long as a lance. When Atahualpa heard that the Spaniards were looking at it, he requested that he also might be allowed to see it, and when he beheld it, he became very sad, and continued so during the next day. The governor Don Francisco Pizarro asked him why he continued to be so sad, and he replied, "I have seen a sign in the sky, and I tell you that when my father, Huayna, died he saw a similar sign." Within 15 days Atahualpa was dead. Chapter 66. Of the fertility of the land in these coast valleys, and of the many fruits and roots they contain. Also concerning their excellent system of irrigating the fields. Now that I have given as brief an account as possible of several things connected with our subject, it will be well to return to the valleys, treating of each one separately, as I have already done of the provinces and villages of the Sierra. But first I will say somewhat concerning the fruits, other food, and works of irrigation which are to be found in them. All the land of these valleys, which is not reached by the sand, forms one of the most fertile and abundant regions in the world, and the one best suited for cultivation. I have already mentioned that it does not rain, and that the water for irrigation is drawn from the rivers which descend from the mountains and fall into the South Sea. In these valleys the Indians sow maize, which is reaped twice in the year, and yields abundantly. In some parts they grow yuccas, which are useful for making bread and liquor when there is want of maize. They also raise sweet potatoes, the taste of which is almost the same as that of chestnuts, besides potatoes, beans, and other vegetables. Throughout all the valleys there is also one of the most singular fruits I ever saw, called pepinos, of very pleasant smell and taste. There are great quantities of guayavas, guavas, and paltas, which are like pears, guanavanas, quemitos, and the pines of those parts. About the houses of the Indians many dogs are seen, which are very different from the Spanish kind, and about the size of ordinary curs. They call them chanos. The Indians breed many ducks. In the thickets of these valleys there are algarobas, somewhat long and narrow, and not so thick as the pods of beans. In some parts they make bread of these algarobas, and it is considered good. They are very fond of drying such of their fruits and roots as are adapted for it, just as we make preserved figs, raisins, and other fruits. Now there are many great vineyards in these valleys, where large harvests of grapes are gathered. No wine has yet been made from them, and I cannot, therefore, certify to its quality, but, as the land is irrigated, it will probably be weak. There are now also fig trees and pomegranates, and I believe, and hold for certain, that all the fruits of Spain may be grown here. Wheat is raised, and it is a beautiful sight to see the fields covered with crops, in a region devoid of natural supplies of water. Barley grows as well as wheat, and lemons, limes, oranges, and citrons are all excellent and plentiful. There are also large banana plantations, and besides those which I have already enumerated, there are many other luscious fruits which I do not mention, because it seems sufficient to enumerate the principal ones. As the rivers descend from the mountains and flow through these valleys, and as some of the valleys are broad, while their whole extent is, or was, when the country was more thickly populated, covered with flocks, they led channels of water in all directions, which is a remarkable thing, for these channels were conducted over high and low places, along the sides of hills and over them, some in one direction, some in another, so that it is a great enjoyment to travel in these valleys, and to pass through their orchards and refreshing gardens. The Indians had, and still have, great works for drawing off the water, and making it flow through certain channels. Sometimes it has chanced that I have stopped near one of these channels, and before we had finished pitching the tent the channel was dry, the water having been drawn off in another direction, for it is in the power of the Indians to do this at their pleasure. These channels are always very green, and there is plenty of grass near them for horses. In the trees and bushes many birds fly about, there are pigeons, doves, turkeys, pheasants, and some partridges, besides many deer in the thickets. But there are no evil things, such as serpents, snakes, and wolves. There are, however, many foxes, which are so cunning that, although great care is taken to watch the things where the Spaniards or Indians encamp, they come to steal, and when they can find nothing better, they make off with the bridles or switches for the horses. In many parts of the valleys there are extensive fields of sweet cane, and they make sugar, treacle, and other things from it. All these Yunka Indians are great laborers, and when they carry loads they strip to the skin, until they have nothing on save a bit of cloth between the legs, and so they run with their loads. They took great care in irrigating their land, and also in sowing, which was done by many in concert together. I will now speak of the road from the city of San Miguel to that of Truxillo. Chapter 67. Of the road from San Miguel to Truxillo, and of the valleys between those cities. In a former chapter I described the foundation of the city of San Miguel, the first settlement made by the Spaniards in Peru. I will now treat of what there is between this city and Truxillo, the distance between the two cities being 70 leagues, a little more or less. On setting out from San Miguel there is a distance of 22 leagues over a sandy waste before reaching the valley of Motupe. The road is very wearisome, especially by the route which is now used. There are certain little ravines on this road, but, although some streams descend from the mountains, they do not reach these ravines, but are lost in the sand, in such sort that no use can be made of the water. To go over these 22 leagues it is necessary to set out in the afternoon, and, traveling all night, some springs are reached early in the morning, where the traveler can drink, and go on without feeling the heat of the sun. It is usual for travelers to carry calabashes of water and bottles of wine with them. In the valley of Motupe the royal road of the Incas is seen, broad and constructed in the manner described in a former chapter. This valley is broad and very fertile, and although a good-sized river flows down into it from the mountains, all the water is lost before reaching the sea. The algarobas and other trees grow well, on account of the moisture which they find under their roots. In the lower part of the valley there are villages of Indians, who are supported by water which they obtain from deep wells. They get all that they require by exchanging one thing for another amongst themselves, for they do not use money, nor is any dye for coining to be found in these parts. They say that there were great buildings for the Incas in this valley, and the people had, and still have, their huacas, or burial places in the barren heights and stony places leading to the Sierra. The late wars have reduced the numbers of the Indians, and the buildings have fallen into ruins, the present inhabitants living in small huts, built in the same way as those described in a former chapter. At certain seasons they trade with the people of the Sierra, and in the valley there are great fields of cotton, with which they make their clothes. 4 leagues from Motupe is the fresh and beautiful valley of Zionca, which is nearly 4 leagues broad. A pleasant river flows through it, whence they lead channels which serve to irrigate all the land that the Indians choose to sow. In former times this valley was thickly peopled, like all the others, and it contained great buildings and storehouses belonging to the principal chiefs, where their officers were stationed. The native chiefs of these valleys were reverenced by their subjects, and those who survive still are so. They go about with a retinue of servants and women, and have their porters and guards. From this valley the road leads to that of Tukim, which is also large, pleasant, and full of trees and bushes. It contains vestiges of edifices, which are now ruined and abandoned. A short journey further on brings us to another very beautiful valley called Cinto. And the reader is to understand that from valley to valley the way is over sandy and parched up stony wastes, where no living thing is to be seen, neither grass nor tree, nothing but a few birds that may be seen flying. Those who travel over the broad sandy deserts, and catch sight of the valley, although still far off, are much cheered, especially if they are on foot, under a hot sun, and suffering from thirst. Men who are new to the country should not travel over these wastes, except with good guides who know the way. Further on is the valley of Hakluyt, through which flows a river of the same name, so broad that it cannot be forded except in the season when it is summer in the Sierra, and winter on the coast. Nevertheless, the natives are so well practiced in the management of irrigation channels that, even when it is winter in the Sierra, they sometimes leave the main stream dry. This valley, like the others, is broad and full of trees, but there is a want of inhabitants, for most of them have been carried off by the wars with the Spaniards, and by the evils which these wars brought with them. Chapter 68. In which the same road is followed as has been treated of in the former chapter, until the city of Truxillo is reached. Beyond the valley of Hakluyt there is another valley called Sana, which resembles the others. Further on is the valley of Pacasmayu, which is the most fertile and populous of any that I have yet mentioned. The natives of this valley, before they were conquered by the Incas, were powerful, and respected by their neighbors, and they had great temples where they offered sacrifices to their gods. They are all now in ruins. In the rocks and hills of the surrounding desert there are a great quantity of huacas, which are the burial places of these Indians. In all these valleys there are clergymen or friars who look after the conversion and teaching of the Indians, not permitting them to practice their ancient religious customs or usages. A very fine river flows through this valley of Pacasmayu, whence they lead many large channels, sufficient to irrigate all the fields that are cultivated by the Indians, and they raise the fruits and roots already enumerated. The royal road of the Incas passes through this valley, as it does through all the others, and here there were great buildings for the Incas' use. The natives tell some ancient traditions of their fathers, which, being fables, I shall not write down. The lieutenants of the Incas collected the tribute, and stored it in the buildings which were made to receive it, whence it was taken to the chief station in the province, the place selected for the residence of the captain general, and where the temple of the sun was erected. In this valley of Pacasmayu they make a great quantity of cotton cloth. The land is suited for breeding cows, still better for pigs and goats, and the climate is healthy. I passed through this valley in the month of September, in the year 1548, to join the other soldiers who had come from the government of Popayan to reinforce the royal camp, and chastise the late rebellion. It then appeared to me to be extremely pleasant, and I praised God on seeing its freshness, with so many trees and flowers, and branches full of 1,000 kinds of birds. Further on is the valley of Chacama, not less fertile and abundant than that of Pascamayu, and in addition it contains great quantities of sweet cane, of which they make much excellent sugar, and other conserves. There is here a Dominican monastery, which the Reverend Father Friar Domingo de Santo Thomas founded. 4 leagues further on is the valley of Chimu, which is broad and very large, and here the city of Truxillo is built. Some Indians relate that, in ancient times, before the Incas extended their sway so far, there was a powerful lord in this valley, who was called Chimu, as the valley is now. He did great things, was victorious in many battles, and built certain edifices which even now, though so ancient, clearly appear to have been very grand. When the kings Incas made themselves lords of these coast valleys, they held that of Chimu in great estimation, and ordered large buildings and pleasure houses to be erected in it. The royal road, built with its walls, also passes through the valley. The native chiefs of this valley were always esteemed and held to be rich. This is known to be true, for in the tombs of the principal men much gold and silver have been found. But at present there are few Indians in the valley, most of the land being divided among Spaniards who are citizens of the new city of Truxillo, to form their estates. The seaport, called the roadstead of Truxillo, is not very far from the valley, and all along the coast they kill much fish for the supply of the city and of the Indians themselves. Chapter 69. Of the founding of the city of Truxillo, and who was the founder. The city of Truxillo is founded in the valley of Chimu, near a large and beautiful river, whence they draw channels by which the Spaniards irrigate their orchards and flower gardens. This city of Truxillo is situated in a region which is considered healthy, and on all sides it is surrounded by estates which the Spaniards call granges and farms, where the citizens have their flocks and crops. All the land is irrigated, and in all parts there are many vines, fig and pomegranate trees, and other fruits of Spain, great abundance of wheat, and many orange trees, and it is a pleasant thing to see the flowers. There are also lemons, limes, and citrons, besides plenty of excellent fruits of the country, and they breed many fowls and rear capons. It may be said that the Spanish inhabitants of this city are provided with all they require, having abundance of all the things which I have enumerated. There is no want of fish, as they have the sea not much more than half a league off. The city is built in a level part of the valley, in the midst of a refreshing grove of trees. It is well built, with broad streets and a large open square. The Indians of the Sierra come down from their provinces to serve those Spaniards who hold them in encomienda, and they supply the town with the things they have in their own villages. Vessels sail from the port, laden with cotton cloth made by the Indians, for sale in other parts. The Adelantado Don Francisco Pizarro, governor and captain general in the kingdoms of Peru, founded this city of Truxillo, in the name of the Emperor Charles our Lord, in the year of the birth of our Savior Jesus Christ 1535. Chapter 70. Of the other valleys and villages along the coast road, as far as the city of the kings. In the mountains, before reaching the city of the kings, are the cities of the frontier of Chachapoyas, and that of Leon de Huánuco. I have determined that I will say nothing of these until I begin to give an account of the villages and provinces in the mountains, which still await my notice. I will then write conceiving their foundation, with as much brevity as I can, but at present we must pass forward on our road. The distance from the city of Truxillo to that of the kings is 80 leagues, over sandy deserts and intervening valleys. After leaving Truxillo, the first village is Guanapi, being 7 leagues on the road. This valley was no less noted among the natives in times past for the chicha which was brewed there, than Madrigal or San Martin in Castile are for the good wine that they yield. In ancient times the valley of Guanapi was very populous, and was the residence of chiefs, who were honorably and well treated by the Incas after they submitted to their rule. The Indians who have survived the wars and troubles are skillful in their labor, drawing channels of water from the river to irrigate their fields. The remains may be clearly seen of the buildings and storehouses erected by the king's Incas. There is a useful port at this valley, where many of the ships which sail on the South Sea, from Panama to Peru, call for supplies. From Guanapi the road leads to the Valley of Santa, but before reaching it there is a valley with no river, but a small well at which travelers quench their thirst. This well may be caused by some river which flows through the bowels of the earth. In former days the Valley of Santa was very populous, and there were great chiefs who, at first, even defied the Incas. They say of them that it was more by intrigue and a display of friendship than by force of arms, that they were induced to acknowledge the Incas as their lords. Afterwards the Incas honored them, and held them in great esteem, and the chiefs erected grand edifices by order of the Incas. This valley is one of the largest of any we have passed. A great and rapid river flows through it, which is much swollen when the season in the Sierra is winter, so that some Spaniards have been drowned in crossing from one side to the other. There are now balsas for crossing in. The valley contained many thousands of Indians in former times, but now there are only 400, and this is a lamentable thing to contemplate. That which I most admired, in passing through this valley, was the great number of burial places, and that in all parts of the barren hills above the valley there were quantities of tombs made according to the custom of the Indians, and full of the bones of the dead. Thus the things that are most worthy of notice in the valley are the tombs of the dead in the fields which they cultivated when alive. They used to take great channels of water from the river, with which they irrigated the land. But now there are few Indians, and most of the fields which were once cultivated, are converted into woods, ground overgrown with brambles, and such dense thickets that, in some places, it is difficult to make a way through them. The natives go dressed in shirts and mantles, and the women also. They wear a headdress on their heads to distinguish them from other tribes. All the fruits I have already mentioned grow well in this valley, and the pulses of Spain, and the Indians kill much fish. The ships sailing along the coast always take in water at the river of Santa. And as there are many thickets and few inhabitants, the mosquitoes swarm in such numbers as to be grievous to those who pass through or sleep in this valley. 2 days' journey further on is the valley of Wambacho, of which I shall say no more than that it resembles those already described, that there were buildings in it erected by its chiefs, and that the inhabitants drew channels of water from the river which flows through it, to irrigate their crops. I went in a day and a half from this valley to that of Garme, which was likewise very populous in former days. At present they breed great quantities of cattle, horses, and pigs in it. From Garme the road leads to Parmunga, which is no less pleasant than the other valleys, but I believe that it contains no Indians at all who avail themselves of its fertility. If, by chance, a few remain, It must be in the upper parts near the foot of the mountains, for we saw nothing but trees and wild thickets. There is one thing worth seeing in this valley, which is a fine well-built fortress, and it is certainly very curious to see how they raised water in channels to irrigate higher levels. The buildings were very handsome, and many wild beasts and birds were painted on the walls, which are now all in ruins and undermined in many places by those who have searched for buried gold and silver. In these days the fortress only serves as a witness to that which has been. 2 leagues from this valley is the river Waman, a word which, in our language, means falcon, but it is usually called the ravine. When it rains much in the Sierra, this river is dangerous, and some people have been drowned in crossing it. 1 day's journey further on brings us to the valley of Huara, whence we pass to that of Lima.